You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and this is 6 Degrees of John Keel.
Hello and welcome to the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. I'm your host, Barbara, and with me tonight is Steve Ward again. It's been a while since I've talked with Steve, but tonight we're going to talk about Dogman, Lycanthropy, Wolfman, all sorts of strange sightings in Great Britain and the United States, recent research, and we're also going to look back at Linda Godfrey, who really, I think, is the one in America who brought Dogman to everybody's consciousness. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing really good.
Excellent. Excellent. You have Mothman looking over your shoulder, making sure that, you know,
I do.
You're
right.
full of the strangeness. There he is.
And so if I hold my head just right, it looks like I've got two antennas.
I know. That was the first thing I saw when you popped on, and I was like, what does he have on his head? So I'm glad to know it's just Mothman, creeping on you.
No, it's just a two-dimensional Mothman.
Well, excellent. So where do you want to start with this? Because you know more about Dogman and all of this stuff than I do.
Well, I guess I'll just start with, I heard Linda Godfrey on, I think it was the Jeff Wren show. This is before, I think around the time of her first publication, The Beast of Bray Road. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it had been out yet or whatever, but I think it must have. But that's what made me go and order the book and check it out. And I've heard a couple reports prior to that of something that they weren't calling a Dogman at that time, but other people had encountered something like that. So I became fascinated by it, and I read her book, the Beast of Bray Road, and it gives a basic recounting of the sightings of this upright canid in the Elkhorn, Wisconsin area, especially along Bray Road. And I have been out to Bray Road a couple times, and it's only about 4.5 miles long, and it was kind of hard to find. It's a little bit east of Elkhorn. And it's just, it's pretty much, there's not much in the way of woods there or anything. It's pretty open. And now there's a guy who actually has a Dogman carving in his front yard. That's in more recent years. But people are stopping on the road all the time and taking pictures. So it's pretty cool. Now, he claimed he hasn't seen it himself. He's actually a little bit further down the road than actually people see it. But we can get into that later, because we'll pick up with Lee Hampel's farm, mm-hmm. who has had all kinds of activity there. And his farm is actually just a stone's throw from Bray Road. But my first time meeting Linda was in 2007. I went to Troy Taylor's Weird Winter event in Decatur, Illinois. And it was the idea was to have the weird book authors there. The two guys, I can't remember their name, that started the Weird Book series from New Jersey, I think, were there. Linda was there because she had written one on Michigan, I think. She contributed to that. And there was some other weird authors there. A lot of people, about half the people that signed up, didn't show up because it was a pretty bad, there'd been a pretty bad snowstorm. But I trekked down from Michigan when I was living there at the time anyway. And it was it was a good event. And what I remember is I was the one in the audience that asked her about updates about the Michigan Dogman. She was talking about other things at the time. And the gang from Ghostly Talk, I've been on their show a few times, and they actually lived a few suburbs from where I grew up. So we become good friends. But they were up in the balcony, And later on, I heard about them talking about it on their show. They were having all kinds of weird activity going on. This is supposed to be a haunted theater that we were at. I don't remember the name of it, but there was weird stuff going on up there on the balcony. Of course, I'm downstairs. I didn't see anything. Nothing touched me. Nothing creepy happened. Never does. And later on, they had Linda Godfrey on, and they were talking to her, and she was wondering if it was something to do with her father, because she said it was the anniversary of, I can't remember if it was his passing or his birthday. And she was wondering if she was going to get some kind of a message or sign from him. So she wondered if that disturbance was anything to do with him trying to make contact. So that was kind of cool. But she signed her second book was out at that time, called the Honey the American Werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
And so she kindly signed that for me. And that's the first. So I saw her several times after that at the Michigan Paracon, the Van Meter Visitor Festival. And there's this great picture. I had this shirt made up called Braved Bray Road, because I did brave Bray Road. I parked in I went to Elkhorn. You can't park on Bray Road. They'll come and tow you away. They don't put up with that nonsense. So I parked in a parking lot about half a mile away from the entrance of Bray Road, and I hiked it. And I went. I only got about I guess it was more like it was about a half mile there, and I only went in about a mile and a half, and then turned back. So the whole ordeal was only 4 miles. But my legs were. I had my winter legs, and I hadn't been exercising much, so they were a little rubbery afterwards. But so that was kind of fun. It was a nice day. And of course, I didn't experience anything. But so I had this T-shirt made up, Braved Bray Road. And there's this great picture of me standing next to her husband, Steve, and Linda at the Van Meter Visitor Festival all together. And then later on, I made a couple of these posters that were sort of tributes to the old UFO Report magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I called it UFO Review, and with a bunch of bogus articles. And it's very colorful. And one is the theme is the Mothman Festival, and the other is the Van Meter Visitor Festival. And so I have all kinds of names of friends are in there making up bogus articles and a lot of humor. I had Chad Lewis and Kevin Nelson looking like Men in Black, and I had Jolena, who was the librarian there. That the article was that she is the one that silenced the Men in Black rather than the other way around. So it just a lot of fun stuff like that. And a good friend of mine, Brandy, I made her an archaeologist, and she discovered giant skulls in Dubuque. So that was kind of funny too. Had these big purple skulls on there. But the best was I took that picture of me, Linda, and Steve, and I called it Bray Road Tours. And, putting on the dog with Linda Godfrey. And, of course, the idea was Steve would be the bus driver. I'd be the guy that would count the number of people that got off at Bray Road and get to come back on. And Linda, of course, was the tour guide. So it was like dial 1-800-GRR, G-R-R-R, Anyway, it was just a lot of fun to do. And I had a copy for her, but she wasn't able to make that one Van Meter conference, and then one was shut down because of COVID, I think. So I never got in contact with her again. But she was. I just have really good memories of her, and I might mention that book, Honey the American Werewolf. There's a really interesting passage in there. She was. There's a book called Wisconsin Mounds, and it deals with the effigy mounds in southern Wisconsin. And she was looking at that, and she had a cluster map of these Dogman sightings in that one area of Wisconsin. And she noticed that they were clustering around certain types of effigy mounds, and most notably panther mounds and water spirit mounds. Now, if you imagine a panther mound, it's very, very simple. You got if you drew an outline of the animal of a panther, you'd have the head, a little bit for the ears and the legs and so forth, and a short tail. The water spirit mounds seem to be a little bit smaller, but what characterized them were like a long, narrow tail. And for some reason, she found that they were these sightings were clustering around these effigy mounds. And, she hadn't really drawn any conclusions from that, but she thought it was probably significant somehow. I think if you go back, I think there's a tradition that something about these dogmen or these spirits or whatever guarding the mounds or whatever. I'm not really well versed on that, but that's what started me off was I bought all her books since then, and I haven't read all of them all the way through, but I perused and I've heard some of them on Audible and so forth, and I've been able to talk to her at length about some of her ideas. So she really. And it turned out that I'm sure you're probably familiar with Dogman Encounters Radio, Vic Cundiff, right? There's just a lot of people that once this was sort of out of the bag, people would say, well, you know what? 20 years ago, I saw something really weird. And it was almost like it began all right to have a Bigfoot encounter. But man, if you saw an upright canid along the road, you just kept your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Because that's just way over the line. So, another thing that, I recently talked to Paul Sinclair. I got to be on his 2-hour stream a couple of weeks ago, and then he agreed to be on my show. And this guy is just fascinating. I mean, you could actually just take a nap and let him talk because he's just endlessly fascinating, and you don't have to, keep the conversation going. He just does it. And he talks a lot about, he's more comfortable with the term werewolf, I think. And he talks a lot about the Flixton werewolf and how far back it goes. There's like encounters that go back apparently hundreds of years. So whatever this thing is seems to be global. And Linda was getting reports from all over the world after a while as well. But one thing that seems to characterize this is the feeling of evil, feeling of negativity. And I haven't really heard that with Bigfoot encounters and some other cryptid encounters. So there's something, I tend to think as a Keelian that perhaps a lot of these things are coming from the same soup, so to speak, just manifesting in different ways. But there seems to be some kind of a distinction between Dogman encounters and some other cryptids.
Yeah. I like what you say when you say, hey, Bigfoot's okay. In the 1970s, there was all these Bigfoot sightings, and it got to be kind of okay to say that because lots of people were saying, well, then maybe there's, an unknown ape running around in the woods in North America. That's okay, But, as soon as the woo-woo people like me come in and go, there's an awful lot of descriptions of it. It's not all the same kind of look like a species would generally be. That's
right.
kind of strange. And footprints that start in the middle of a mud puddle in a muddy field and then walk for like 3 yards and then disappear again when it's uniformly muddy, that's pretty suspicious to me. But the boggle threshold for I guess normal people, not people like you and I, is we are not having Wolfman in our backyard. We are not having that. That is not to be talked about. We're not, we'll put up with Bigfoot, but we're not gonna talk about an upright canid. And that's just no. We're not going to have it. So I find that really interesting that it seems that the boggle threshold for Dogman has loosened a little bit. People are now going, well, maybe there is something to it because so many people have seen it for so long.
Right. It's taken a while. But, and so many of these encounters start out where they just thought it was a big mangy dog.
Yeah.
And then it stands up on 2 legs. I mean, that's just got to be freaky.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the bear wolf. People have seen a couple times, some kind of a weird. I think Linda did a report on one. I think it was in Michigan. This thing came up. He called it what was it? I think he called it a bear wolf or something. It had bear in the name. And it came and it stole a deer out of the back of his truck and walked away with it.
And like he's going to go argue about that. You know,
yes,
it's
yes.
like,
Hey,
you know
a
what?
minute,
I can shoot another deer.
I tagged that deer and it's mine. And
But, I'm not going to argue with Mr. Beowulf. Yeah, he had to have been awfully big to have combination of those two in his name.
And where do these things come from? This big beast. I mean, it's an area that was somewhat rural, but not completely. It was around Fish Lake, I think, and it's just another one of these things where they show up and they disappear.
Yeah,
but they're very physical. They interact with the environment.
Yes,
I mean, this thing grabbed a deer and it wasn't seen again. So and even in another one of Linda's books, I mean, just to confound this thing further. It was, 1994. The guy said he thought he was on Route 81, Mike Moran, and he's driving along, just a two-lane. You probably know this story.
Oh, I remember his name.
He sees the light going through the woods, and he thinks it's got to be some crazy dude. This is night on a four-wheeler or whatever, and he's cruising along, and he's going to come up to the road. And there's a drop off of about 6 or 8 feet, and he's wondering how the heck he's going to get this ATV down that dip. And all of a sudden, now it's not clear if this thing was just a ball of light, or if this creature was glowing, because it was still kind of glowing when it came across the road. But he saw a dogman, an upright canid, hit the road. 3 steps, it was across the road, and then it was gone. So we've heard a lot of stories about balls of light transforming into something. That goes back to Paul Devereaux in Earthlight Revelation, where he coined the term proto-entity, and he gives a lot of examples of balls of light or something that looks like a craft or whatever, but then it morphs into the entity or whatever. It's like the vehicle or the orb or whatever is inseparable from the being somehow.
Yeah.
And there's even an old Mothman encounter that's kind of like that from Kent, England. Almost 3 days to the chase of the mallets and scarberries down Route 62 on November 15th. It was 3 years before in 63. And these kids were coming back from a dance. And they saw this ball of light go down behind a grove of trees and then go out. And then the light appeared again and then went out. And then they saw this creature, which was the closest thing to the Point Pleasant Mothman I've ever heard of, because it looked like it didn't have a head. It had bat-like wings, and it kind of shuffled along like the Mothman. There's been so many other winged creatures or whatever that people want to dub Mothman. And I get very territorial sometimes. It's like, hey, that's not the Point Pleasant Mothman, damn it. I know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the guy in the pecan tree down in Texas comes close to the winged man thing that a family sitting on a porch saw.
No, okay.
But it didn't have it had a head. It looked like a man with wings, but he was gray and he was spooky. Obviously, because people shouldn't have wings and be flying around. But I don't think he had the glowing eyes. I just think
this one didn't either.
Yeah.
This one in Kent, England did not.
Yeah. Well, maybe he didn't need it because he just had been a ball of light. So,
That's right.
One of the things that I really find fascinating about these upright canid beings is that almost every culture has a story about shape-shifting and humans shape-shifting into animals. And wolves are one of the most common ones.
Right.
And psychologically, I wonder if that's because humans have partnered with dogs so strongly. Like, there are people, archaeologists and anthropologists, who say that, humanity may not have ever really learned agriculture without dogs, because we would have had no really good way to round up herds of domesticated animals.
Right.
And, because, people can run for a long time, but, dogs are way better at that.
Oh, sure.
And, and dogs came from wolves. And we know that. I think even after we'd had dogs for, quite some time before we started writing a lot of stuff down, I'm sure everybody realized that those dogs originally were those wolves, and humans were afraid of wolves. Now, I want to know if we were afraid of wolves because we lived closer to the outside, at one time. And that's what made us afraid of them. Because, zoologists will just tell you now that most wolves will never approach a human.
Right.
They are more afraid of us than we are of them. So where did this image, this fearsome beast, this horrifying creature come from? And I find that interesting. If it's maybe the dog is the good canid, and then the wolf is the shadow being, just like humans have shadows.
Right.
Shadow sides. Maybe that's the shadow side of a dog.
I don't know. I was fascinated by that when I was a kid. I actually, one of the few times I went to the library to do research, and I got the Encyclopedia Britannica out and to learn about werewolves. And it talked about how sometimes people would wear some kind of a belt or garment, and sometimes they would use some kind of magical herbs or whatever. Wasn't quite the Lon Chaney werewolf,
right?
But, now for the most part, when people are talking about these dogman creatures, they're not talking about transformation. But Linda has a couple every once in a while. She's got a story in there about somebody that claims to have seen a transformation. Now, that's one of those areas where I kind of hit a wall. And I'm kind of like the people that hit a wall with John Keel or some of the one things that I accept, And I think, well, maybe I'm not being open enough. But that's a real tough one to accept a physical transformation. Of course, we have the lore of the skinwalker, which is supposed to do that, and you wonder if that's if it's a physical transformation or if it's more of a projection of something. I don't know, but I don't know. That's a good point. I don't know why. I guess there were other animals that they believed people could change into.
Yeah.
But the wolf seemed to be the prominent one, the one
big
the most
bad.
fearsome. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't necessarily. Well, okay. So you went to the library to research werewolves. I did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated.
What does that say about us?
I know. It says that we're weird, really weird. But I remember reading about the disease of lycanthropy.
Oh, yes.
Where it's a mental disease where you believe that you have become a beast, usually a wolf. And I thought that was so fascinating. And there are cases of men who would do these rituals, like a belt. You had an enchanted belt, and you put it on. It was made of wolf skin, and then you could turn into a wolf. But there are cases of men who had lycanthropy or believed they had done these rituals correctly, and they would go out and kill other people, and some of them were cannibals. And this is all written up in European history. So I'm so excited that I learned about this. I was spending the weekend with my grandparents, and we sit down to lunch, and Grandma made 3 hot meals a day. So she was busy all the time. But we sit down and I said, Grandpa, guess what I learned about? And he said, what? And I said, did you know there's a disease called lycanthropy? And then I started talking about how they, attack people, and there are these woodcut illustrations, and I described them. And he just looked at me and he went, this is not something to talk about while we eat. And I said, why? And he's just no. And it's not like he was squeamish. He was a farmer. I helped him butcher animals. So I was kind of like, what's wrong with him? And then I said, do you want to hear about porphyria? And he said, no, I don't.
Well, there's another disease. There was a case in England. I can't pull out the details, but there's some kind of an ailment where people grow all kinds of hair on their face. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah,
they think that some people were kind of locked away and seen every once in a while, and that would give rise to the belief of a local werewolf of some type.
Yeah, that's a genetic disorder, and
right.
I think it was the King of Spain had a person in his retinue who was afflicted with that. It was a woman. And, there are portraits painted of her with this long hair on her face and hands, but she's wearing the really beautiful court gown. And he got for her a good marriage. Actually, it was the Queen who did that. But yeah, it was a thing. And so people would see that and think that was a werewolf. But as you said, Paul Sinclair was talking about a tradition in England of people having seen these upright canids going back hundreds of years.
Right. And he's got this great documentary called Wolflands. And I should say that he has 4 books out called Truth Proof, The Truth That Leaves No Proof, 4 volumes. And one called Night People, I believe, which is autobiographical. And I tell people, avoid Amazon, US and UK. They've gone to third-party pirates. I'm fine with capitalism, but man, these guys are gouging people to death. If you go, you can, I don't have the actual website, but if you Google Paul Sinclair Books UK, I think you'll find where you can buy his books direct from the UK. The shipping might be a little pricey, but the price of the books are going to be reasonable. And I've ordered the 4th Truth Proof and the Night People because it didn't show it available in anything other than Kindle here. And I'd love to have the book in my hands. So those are on the way. And I've also ordered a hard copy of the Wolflands documentary, but you can stream that for just a few bucks on Amazon US or Amazon UK. And it's absolutely, I told Paul how well it was done. The production values are amazing. The editing, the music composed for it, and the way the narrative unfolds. He interviews several people that have had encounters with this beast, whatever it is. And again, Paul's more comfortable with calling it a werewolf. And he takes you around to these people, and he jumps back and forth to the different witnesses. Mm-hmm. And it's with the purpose of showing the patterns that are there, the similarities. And when you see these people talk about their experiences, they are terrified. Mm-hmm. These are very sincere people, and it's just so well done. It's so atmospheric. It's like kind of like watching a horror movie, a well done horror movie, but it's based on something real. And I heartily recommend people watch it or order it. And it's just again, just amazingly well put together.
Yeah. He's a good writer. I've read Truth Proof up to 3 and The Night People. I was dumb and read The Night People first. It was super creepy. And it boy, was it creepy. So, I took notes in it for my research, and, I was just kind of like, oh my God, I'm afraid of the other ones. But they're much less, I mean, they're still fascinating. They're about his encounters and investigations of UFOs in Yorkshire and the surrounding areas up in the north of England. But it isn't as scary. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of times when it's scary and you're like, oh, well, okay, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have read this at night. I'm dumb. But
well, he talks about the Flixton werewolf. He talks about large black panthers. He's chronicled and even photographed a lot of strange lights, orbs on the land and out to sea. And these are not, lanterns, Chinese lanterns, or flares or anything like that. And it's just really well told. I mean, you feel like you're there with him on the cliffs, experiencing this.
Yeah.
And then he in his books he has just a very nice approach with people, and he's made all kinds of inroads. He can go to some of these captains that run boats, and he can look at their logs, and see if they've gone out to perform a rescue or whatever. And he talks about missing people. A lot of it is like shades of David Paulides, Missing 411. And this is North and East Yorkshire, and concentrated in a relatively small area, but incredibly active. And he just has such a great way with himself. He's just such a down to earth guy.
Yeah,
and just very, very credible.
Oh yeah, I think so too. And there are lights on and in the water too, and under the water.
Well, it talks about like a triangle.
Yeah,
with the light at each corner, just under the water.
Yeah, and he said is so creepy.
Yes, and he said in one case there were some kind of UFOs or whatever plunging into the water, but it was so shallow there, even at high tide, it didn't make any sense. Where were they going?
Right. Why did they disappear? It's not that far down. Yeah. Yeah. I really like his books. And there are also lots of other weird, there's some strange humanoids and just all kinds of stuff happening. And
animal mutilations.
Oh yes. There sheep a lot of sheep mutilations.
And some seem to be surgical. People want to blame it on these large black panthers, but it doesn't always make sense. And oftentimes, just like sometimes Bigfoot reports where animals are slaughtered, chickens or whatever, they're not eaten; they're just slaughtered.
Yeah.
It's like Keel when he talked about these things sort of coming into existence, sort of acting like animals while they're here, and then melting away.
Yeah. Yeah, like they are physical for a very short period of time.
Right.
And they leave physical traces, but then the traces just end. The footprints end. It doesn't make sense. The animal, disappearances or mutilations stop.
Right.
And it's disturbing. All of it's very disturbing.
And Paul's very open. I mean, a lot of times he'll question, how can this be a physical animal? Why? Because it kind of disappears, it goes away. Are we dealing with something, another type of reality that we step into or whatever? So he's always asking these questions and trying to deal with the reality of the way these things exist and manifest.
Yeah. He's a very, very thorough researcher, and you're right. I like the way that he writes because it's very immediate. So you can feel and see his descriptive ability is very strong. I really, really enjoy his work. So eventually I'm going to have him on the podcast.
Yeah, you'll like I say, you can probably go just take a nap and listen to it later because he's just so good. You don't have to prompt him. I wanted to stop him every once in a while because I had a question, but there's just so many. He had this one incident. I won't go into it too much. I want people to listen to him tell it or read the book. But in the first book, remember, he has that weird. He and his wife encounter that weird man.
Yep, that
was
dude
on the bicycle.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. He said, "You're bringing down the light."
Yep.
You're angering people or whatever. And so I got Paul to tell that story toward the end of the interview, and I said, well, and this guy was so weird. And I said, well, Paul, you are bringing down the light, and you're making a lot of people angry. Officialdom, and even the average person that doesn't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny that whoever this dude was, he was right on the mark, because that's what Paul has been doing.
Yeah. I will definitely have him tell that story, because that was what I was thinking of when I said the strange humanoids or whatever's.
Yeah.
Although he did have the experience with his cousin and the dude at the Rock when he was a kid, and that was so creepy.
Oh,
yeah.
And then there was a classic Man in Black encounter with I don't remember the guy's name, but a friend and colleague of his. The guy had seen some kind of a UFO or light, and these dudes came to the door with no eyebrows and dressed like classic Men in Black, telling him he's got to stop his research. And I'm thinking, every once in a while you come across. You know who Linda Sigmund is?
Mm-hmm.
She came forward more recently with her Mothman sighting from it was April of '67. I think she said she was about 16, and she and her boyfriend were sitting on the front of the hood of a car watching the stars. They saw this orb show up, and then they saw another one. He decided, I'm really abbreviating this. He wanted to get the heck out of there, and they're driving away. And she's looking out the window, and she sees this Mothman-like creature next to one of these lights. And the thing is that, and she even had missing time. Mm-hmm. But the sort of the postscript to all this was the beginning of December, the same December '67, when the bridge collapsed in 2015. And that's coming up. The anniversary is coming up in a few days.
Yeah.
That's just taping. She was downtown Point Pleasant, and she saw this strange man standing outside a building, and he was in classic, fedora, black clothes. And as she got closer, she noticed his skin had a weird pallor, had a weird coloring, and was wearing sunglasses at night. And then she looked down the street, and there was another one of these guys leaning up against a light pole. And I think, and I said, when did this click as to what this was? And it wasn't until she read The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel sometime later that she thought, oh my God, that's what I experienced.
Yeah.
So it's weird, because we tend to want to try to explain these as, just government types or just some creep that was hanging out, and causing trouble. But man, you get into some of these encounters, and there's something just totally bizarre there that's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah. The unearthly pallor, the lack of eyebrows, kind of weirdly plastic looking skin, like really artificially smooth looking, because you guys, you don't fix your pores and stuff. You just wash your face and you go. You're right. And I do the same thing, but most men don't have that perfectly smooth skin,
Right.
And that is something that I would notice immediately. I mean, they all have that kind of uncanny valley look. It's like, well, they're like a guy. They look like a guy. They look like a, and then they get too close, and then you go, wait a minute.
Yeah, something, and then the sometimes the movements, the way that they just can't. I even wondered. I think due to some of Nick Redford's research, I wondered if some of these characters were actually sent out by a faction of the government to behave in strange ways to kind of throw people off. I mean, the government does all kinds of bizarre tests and schemes that they eventually forget about or whatever. But I just wonder if they sent out maybe hundreds of these clowns to act weird and figuring that some of them would be picked up into the lore. But that doesn't explain everything.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
That case is true.
So, have there been any kind of Men in Black encounters that go with Dogman sightings or Wolfman sightings?
Boy, that's a good question. I not that I know of. They seem to have shown up with some of the Bigfoot reports. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Stan Gordon, Silent Invasion, there were men that showed up, seeming to destroy evidence, and there was that crazy case where the guy took a shot. He didn't actually shoot them. He was used tracer shells over these bizarre-looking Bigfoots after seeing this strange craft seemingly to land, and it was so crazy. The local a state cop actually saw one of them in the dark, and later on, Stan and his team came out. This guy had a weird spell and collapsed. And he was growling and everything. His father thought
like he was
the Bigfoot was
possessed.
possessing him or something. But he had a vision of a man in a cloak and had all kinds of predictions. But he didn't remember any of it. I mean, it's just more complicated than that. But you had strange lights. You had these Bigfoot creatures that seemed to vanish. But then afterwards, Stan and his team wanted to put him under hypnosis, and they thought, well, with that weird spell he had, maybe we better just leave it alone for a while. And I think it was as much as 2 years later, they came to him and they said, would you mind if we put you under hypnosis during that? And he said, what do you mean? You guys came back 2 weeks later. Mm-hmm. And a man dressed like an Air Force officer and a man in plain clothes implied, apparently, they were Stan's team. Mm-hmm. And they put him under hypnosis, said, we'll get back to you. Of course, they didn't. And he said they even showed him this portfolio with photographs of Bigfoot-like creatures and UFOs. At least this is what he claimed, and wanted to know if what he saw looked like any of these pictures. So I don't know what to make of that, but that's sort of your, Keel talked about the man in black as a generic term, not necessarily dressed in the black garb or whatever. But so yeah, this is. Well, that's a good question. I wouldn't be surprised if there have been some, but there was that weird case in the Linda talks about in the beginning of the Beast of Bray Road, where I think it's Lori Andrezzi was one of the original witnesses that brought it to Linda's attention, and then she was writing for The Week, which is a little local newspaper, and she went to the local sheriff and found out he had a file that said werewolf because he'd been getting these reports. But she was talking to John Andres, no, John, I can't think of his last name, but he was the animal control officer. And she thought, she had the impression that this thing was very negative or whatever. He was skeptical about the whole thing, but they started talking about the possibility of some kind of cult being involved. And then all of a sudden, several books flew out of the shelf in the office, and nobody had slammed the door or anything like that. So, here you're just talking about it. I mean, how many times have we heard things about poltergeist phenomena or something? I mean, how many people that saw the Mothman had an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena afterwards? And how do we reconcile this as a flesh and blood unknown creature, So it just seems like you drop the pebble in the water, and the rings go out, and they just keep going, and they touch all kinds of different things. It's just not nothing is static.
Yeah,
there's so many. Now, and when you mentioned footprints appearing in the middle of nowhere, that brings me back to Lee Hampel. Now, Lee Hampel has a farm. He was degrees in mathematics and chemistry. He taught mathematics for decades in Illinois, and this guy's a scientist. So he got this farm over 10 years ago, and he's making hay. Sounds funny, but he's enjoying his retirement and making a little money and keeping busy. And some of his neighbors said, there's a werewolf that lives in those woods back there. And he's looking at him like, what are you talking about? And then several credible people were telling him what they had seen. And then one night he saw it. He saw it in the dark. And later on, he realized he was missing about an hour of time.
Oh.
So he started setting up trap cameras. He's got thousands of photographs. I've been able to speak at the Beast of Bray Road conference a couple times. And what they do is people that go to that, Lee Hampel will have them over to his farm, for a small fee. And for 2 hours, he'll show you photographs he's taken with trap cameras and all the bizarre things that are going on. So you have, he's got these footprints. In one case, in the snow, they start in the middle of nowhere, and then they split off, almost like this thing divided like an amoeba into two of them.
Oh.
Or maybe his buddy was on his shoulders, when they manifested. But it's, and then they disappear. And they're 5 toes.
Oh.
5 toes, a pad, and a heel. And he says when he looks at these tracks, he thinks there's maybe 4 or 5 different creatures because they're not all exactly the same. And whenever he tries to, he leaves, these things act like animals. They eat bait, they eat roadkill. He sets up cameras with the bait, and the cameras don't function for the most part when they're there. He's gotten I think he's actually gotten some pictures of them. He keeps a lot of these things close to his vest. And there are some where you can see part of the ear or whatever. I guess it could be Scooby-Doo or something, but I don't think so. But he's got some, there's some kind of technology or something going on. There's drones in the sky. There's things that look like they might be a portal, some kind of energy ball or whatever. There are things that are almost incomprehensible when you, there was this one image where you see something that looks like a black snake sort of suspended in the sky, but it's just, or a cord or something. And then he moves over to the other part of the picture, and there is a kind of a boxy looking thing with balls on it or wheels or something kind of suspended in the air. And you're trying to make sense of this. There is something bizarre going on. I don't know if it's a place where the air is thin, so to speak, or if it's a grand central station between dimensions. He had another photograph of a classic flying saucer, a black flying saucer, zipping around a tree. You can tell by the timestamp, but it was just like a matter of a few seconds, and it just it appears, zips around, and it's gone. He has had. Now he's let me use some of his images. He put some of them on Coast to Coast AM, and he gave me. He was on my show, and he liked the way it went, so he allowed me to use some of his photographs and presentations. But the ones I don't have is he's had several roadkill deer because of the highway he's on. Well, he's pulled them on his property. He sets up a trap camera, and it's night, and you can see a mist show up, and with the timestamp, and then the carcass is gone. No drag marks, no footprints. And this has happened maybe a dozen times. It's just, it's just mind blowing. And so, I wonder what, I've tried to speculate as to what's going on. Is there really some kind of other intelligence there? Are they, if we think about tulpas and monsters from the id and all that sort of thing, I wonder, do these things create these constructs, these temporal beings? Maybe they don't just happen, and they're supposed to scare people away. Mm-hmm. Now, if that wild speculation is correct, they might be all wet because people are flocking there to see these things. So they're not really scaring people away; they're attracting them. But I just can't. It's so hard to wrap my head around. Now, and then I don't know if you know the Bucks County guys. Eric Mintel Investigates. Mm-hmm. Okay. They were out there a couple of years ago, along with Ellen Collins, and it was Eric Mintel and Dominic Seitel. Dominic is their sensitive, and they were out there and at night, and they start to hear this howling. They've got it on their YouTube video. And you hear this howling off to one side, and then a howling over here, creepy as hell. Now, I wouldn't be able to tell you an animal howl from a marsupial, I just wouldn't be able to do it. So, but they were seeing eye shine about 6 feet off the ground. Mm. They also, prior to that, they actually saw a light in the sky they thought was a satellite, and then it all of a sudden zipped across the sky. And then a mist started to form. And the mists have, there was a photograph of Lee Hampel in the daylight there's a mist surrounding him on the picture, but he didn't see it when he was there. So, mist around that place. It could have been just basic atmospheric conditions. It had rained earlier in the general area, so maybe that was it. But they were really getting freaked out. And even Eric, who usually these things don't bother him. So I asked Dominic on my show, I said, Dominic, what were you feeling like out there being the sensitive? And he said, I felt like I was in a shark tank underwater holding the bait. And they decided they were going to get out of there. They had enough, and they weren't there very long. So, and the ironic thing is, a week later, they're in the Pine Barrens, or like 5 miles deep into the Pine Barrens, with a couple of seasoned Bigfoot researchers, and they're hearing things like whoops and knocking and all that sort of thing. And Dominic felt like it was a day at the beach. He wasn't freaking out at all. He was just very calm. There was something about that experience that really, really, and I could hear things moving in the corn.
Corn's creepy anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
Stephen King ruined corn for everybody.
Yes, that's right.
Now, does Lee have problems with like poltergeist stuff on his farm or in his house?
Now that's a good question. When we were there, the cars were parked there, a friend of mine's car lights started to flash. And even when she went to a motel that night, she said they were still, they're flashing into the window. It was one of these motels where the door is right there. The car was still, the lights were still flashing. And that happens to a lot of cars in that area. So I haven't heard of anything like poltergeist phenomena in his house. But he had another issue with missing time at another time. And he's seen this thing 2 or 3 times. And he even got a photograph of it from a distance. I mean, you can see it at arm's length. It doesn't look very high. But he has some kind of a program that would tell you how tall this thing was. And it was 6 feet tall. And you could see it, sometimes it was hunkered down on all fours, and sometimes it was standing on 2. This is in broad daylight. So there's something truly bizarre going on there. But it's what I can't wrap my head around is this incredible conjunction with apparently some kind of technology guided by, and there's some kind of an intelligence there that is helping to cloak and hide these things from the cameras.
Yeah.
And Eric said when they were out there that night, the cameras completely failed. They didn't take any pictures of them when they were out there.
Yeah. Yeah, they've had problems with that out at Skinwalker Ranch too.
Right.
Cameras, they'll place cameras and stick them down with duct tape and electrical tape and all kinds of stuff, and it'll get ripped off way up, 20 feet up a pole that it's slippery and, all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, there's a part of me is like, dudes, it's going to not let you take pictures. It's just not, right. It's not gonna. Now, you should keep trying, but don't be surprised that you don't ever get a picture.
That's that classic case that I remember listening to Colin Kelleher and George Knapp on the Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell years ago, when before the book The Hunt for the Skinwalker was written, and we get these tantalizing stories about what was going on out there, and that was when they had something like 4 or 5 cameras way up on the poles, aimed in an area that was had a lot of activity. And one camera stayed operating, as I remember, and they went back to look at that footage, and they could see some of the red dot on some of the other cameras, and they could see when the red dot went out. Mm-hmm. But they couldn't get the resolution to see that they had, and it wasn't just an internal mechanical failure or electrical failure. Like you say, the cables were ripped out.
Yeah.
Physically ripped out.
Yeah, violently. That's one of the things that struck me about it, is that it was not just disconnected or the battery taken out or the battery drained. No, it was they were torn up. The whatever they used to adhere it to the pole would get ripped apart, and then pieces of the camera itself would be torn. And so, yeah, that's also an intimidation tactic.
That suggests a direct intelligence of consciousness that knows exactly what's going on, and they took a direct route to stop it.
Yeah. Took a very direct route. And, again, that's an intimidation tactic. It also worked to terrorize the humans who it apparently thought of as its enemy.
Right.
Whatever it is.
Well, remember the incident where I guess this is again before I think Bigelow still had a presence there, and it was before. It might have even been before Bigelow purchased the ranch, but because some of this had gotten out in the newspaper, and there was a guy that made a pilgrimage there because he felt at one with the ranch and he wanted to meditate, and so Sherman, the father and the son, kind of looked at each other and said, okay, have at it, So he goes out there in the field and he starts to meditate, and they see this thing that like a blur. And later on, they said it looked like the Predator effect from the film Predator. And there's something, they couldn't really focus on it very well, but it came out and it was like it was angry at what this guy was doing. And all this guy is doing is meditating, thinking good thoughts, but whatever this was didn't like it. And it freaked this guy out, and he couldn't wait to get off the property. But, what the heck is that all about?
My guess is that whatever it is based not in carbon. In other words, it's not always solid. It's probably energy. And it probably could sense that he was doing something that changed the energy of its environment. And it was having none of that. It was like, oh no, how dare you? This is mine.
How dare you think lofty thoughts?
Yes, this is mine. You don't get to come here and mess with my stuff without my permission. You didn't even ask. So I'm going to run you off. I'm not saying I would go and ask permission and be able to, sit and meditate. I wouldn't even think that was a great idea. But there are some non-corporeal beings that are very, very territorial, like wolves and dogs. Just saying.
And according to some of the reports, and you don't know how reliable some of them are, people have seen orbs of light manifest into wolves there. And of course, there was the story in the beginning of the Hunt for the Skinwalker, with that beast that attacked some of their livestock, and they kept firing at it. It wasn't, it wasn't causing any problems, and it just walked away. And of course, the prints ended in the swamp somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, they shot a piece of its flesh off, but it didn't stay. Yeah. See, that's the part where I'm like, okay, it's time to go now. I don't care that we just bought this. We're not staying here tonight. Nope. Nope.
Another thing about the Dogman, a few years ago, I was at a Michigan MUFON meeting, and a gentleman that was a retired Wayne State University professor talked about his research in Michigan into Bigfoot and UFOs. And he sounded a lot like Jack, I think it's Jack Lapseritis that wrote Psychic Bigfoot and the Sasquatch People or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was some pretty wild stuff, but he's a really down-to-earth guy. But the thing that caught my attention was he said, we keep finding these large dog-like footprints in these high strangeness areas. And I thought, well, where have I heard that before? Well, it turned out I heard it in the Mothman Prophecy.
Yep.
John Keel talks about in other articles, he talks about dog-like footprints around the Old North Power Plant, and also where Tad Jones saw that bizarre retro UFO with the propeller on the bottom.
Yep.
Near Cross Village.
And the weird, Cross Lanes. The weird guy beside it with the weird shoe soles.
Yeah.
It's funny. The last time I read that, I looked up the name of the man who had first investigated it before Keel got there. He worked at the same place my dad worked up at Union Carbide's Tech Center. So my dad knew the guy. And I thought about it, and I was like, that's the guy that my dad said was like really down to earth and sensible and not prone to flights of fancy. And he was also the only guy that my dad would say, hey, have you seen the weird lights over the other side of the valley? Because my dad used to stand outside during lunch. He worked overnight, so lunch was, deep dark.
Right.
And, he'd tell him about the weird lights that he was watching, and sometimes they'd watch together. But yeah, I never have forgotten that there were those giant dog prints in cross lanes.
And then remember, he consulted with Ivan Sanderson, and Ivan Sanderson said, yeah, we keep finding them. And you wish there was a whole chapter devoted to that, or at least a couple pages.
Yeah.
But that's where it ends.
Yeah.
So I asked Linda Godfrey about it, and she said yes. And the one thing she did say, you said you have to be really careful these days because there are people out there faking Dogman footprints. You have to be careful you're not taken in. But here you have 4 researchers separated by half a century, all telling us that we're finding these large dog-like footprints, whether we're actually seeing the culprit or not, in these high strangeness areas. So it's something that is connected to all this and has been with us for quite some time.
Yeah. And I do also think that it's interesting that dogs tend to be afraid of Bigfoot. When we had the howling whatever it was in the woods that sounded like Bigfoot, almost 20 years ago when we lived in another part of Ohio, our dogs were terrified. They were not afraid of anything. They were big and strong and generally not, well, okay, Nanika was afraid of people except for us. But the other one feared nothing, and they hunkered down and just basically tried to hide. So, of course I had to go out and bring them in. But yeah, dogs generally either start barking crazily when there's some kind of Bigfoot activity or they're terrified. And then there's cases with Bigfoot eating dogs or Mothman or something or UFOs. Right. So,
although in some cases I've heard where all of a sudden the dogs get very quiet.
Yeah.
When some bizarre stuff is going on. But either way, I mean, that's still, people need to pay attention to the responses of animals when these things are going on, because that's just another validation that there's some kind of paranormal phenomena or something unexplained going on.
Yeah. Oh, I just got a book by Linda Zimmerman called Animal Reactions to UFOs.
Oh.
It's a very small book. It basically is sort of a starter to get your ideas running in the direction of how different animals have responded to UFO sightings or experiences. And she's really interesting because she says, animals are the perfect UFO witnesses because they don't hallucinate the way people do. They don't lie, right. So there's no confabulation happening. They're essentially honest, and they have stronger senses than we do. So, they can hear things above and below our ability to hear things. They can see things in slightly different lighting conditions. And they can apparently feel vibrations better than we can. So I thought that was really interesting. And that's, I'm about halfway through it right now.
Yeah, I didn't know. I'm familiar with some of her other books. She was on my show a while back. And, of course, about the Hudson Valley sightings was her specialty. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the sightings in this book are from New York, but she has plenty of others from elsewhere. And she even has this one kind of odd sighting. There's a man who worked a toll booth on a bridge on the night shift, and it's very boring. And so there were, wild rabbits that, lived off at the side of the road in the grass, and they'd come out and eat. And, he took to throwing them vegetables just to have something to watch, so they'd, eat the vegetables. And one night he went to throw them their vegetables and they were laying in the grass, stretched out, and they were completely motionless. And he was shocked. He thought somebody had killed them, or, why they would all die in the same, general area and stretched out like that was also disturbing. So he came out of his toll booth, and he noticed a UFO. He noticed a light, a big light in the sky, and he realized he couldn't move until it flew past. It flew over him and left, and he could move, and then the rabbits started, getting up and moving around again. But then they were freaked out. They wouldn't, he tried to give them their vegetables, and they were like, "No way, man. We're done with this. We're going to go home." And I thought that was really an interesting one. Is that I know that there are a couple of other UFO cases with wildlife that, that has something happen strangely.
Right.
But, more than one wildlife member, so you have a whole family of rabbits. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So have you noticed or thought that there's been an uptick in Dogman sightings or Wolfman sightings? Or does it just seem that way?
I think it seems that way because the floodgates have finally opened. People can finally talk about these things. And, especially I haven't listened to Vic Cundiff on Dogman Encounters Radio for a while. But, he does get recent sightings, but every once in a while he'll get the ones that go back a couple decades or more. And it's something that they haven't told anybody because they're just so bizarre. So I think that the same thing might be true. I think even John Keel thought the flap idea was kind of an illusion. It just kind of depended on what people were reporting and so forth. And as you know, the mainstream media will, once in a while they'll report on a Stevensville or Phoenix Lights or O'Hare Airport or whatever. But for years I subscribed to the UFO news clipping service, at least, now and then. And I inherited a bunch of old ones from the 60s one time from a guy that got out of it. And the thing you find out there is that these things are going on all the time. It's just that they seldom get beyond the local newspaper or just the local area that reported. So I'm not, people do seem to have chronicled, there seem to be certain months, certain days of the week that where these things do seem to tick up. And I found the research of a man named Ahmad Jamaluddin that wrote, the 60 years of suppressed evidence, the humanoid reports. And he took Albert Rosales' database. And of course, Albert Rosales has an amazing database of humanoid reports.
Oh, yeah.
And others amongst us from 1 AD.
Yeah.
And he's got about 15 books out. He's probably due for another one. I can't wait for the next one. But so that was the database that he took. And he found that in focusing on humanoid reports, there were certain times of the day that it was more likely to have a humanoid encounter than other times of the day. At noon, at lunchtime, forget it. You're probably not going to see anybody. But between 10 and 2 a.m., 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., if there's things going on in the area, it's not just going to happen anywhere. You would have a better chance of having one of these encounters. And the bizarre thing is, it holds true, he says, in every time zone. So as the world turns, the point of entry or manifestation, whatever it is the same. And then he talks about humanoid migrations, how 8 to 10 year cycles, how they seem to show up somewhere in South America, then they move up to North America, either the U.S. or Canada. And then they move over to, not on any particular time scale, but they'll move over to Britain or the European continent, and then Asia or Malaysia, and then back again to South America. And that's and there's been like these 8 to 10 year cycles for what, 4 or 5 times over the years that he's chronicled. And that is just bizarre. And I wonder, remember the old days when you had Gray Barker and Albert Bender talking about how people would be chronicling where UFOs were coming from. And they were always thinking they were coming from Antarctica. And so they would draw these lines, and then the men in black would manifest or show up because that was a no-no. Whether there was a guy from New Zealand, John Stewart, that supposedly had that experience, Albert Bender, and so forth. And I wonder, it would kind of make sense. Maybe there's nobody around there to see it, but maybe these things actually start at Antarctica and then move up to South America and then around. So, but either way, if there's and I know you've been doing some research into that to see if those kinds of things are verified, hold true. So that'll be fascinating to see if that research can be duplicated. But that's just amazing.
So far, according to Chris, who's the one who's doing all of the coding and working on the database itself, so far it's consistent with what the author found. So I think he's on to something.
Okay.
So far. Also, you can trace flap years by times when the world itself, geopolitically, is having things happen. Having like when the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain fell, there was a lot of UFOs. And then there was, of course, a lot of UFO sightings in the 40s around World War II. So you can follow those times and places, and you will get an uptick in reports. Now what I want to do is take the UFO databases from New Fork, MUFON, Flying Saucer Review, and put those in with the humanoids and see what we get. And we're also working on the USGS map of magnetic anomalies, just because that so far, if what I'm seeing by examining it, visibly, without a computer, but, looking at it, just correlating places and dates and times, latitude and longitude, I am seeing a correlation. Let's just put it that way. I don't know that it's going to prove causation, but it's at least something to show other people where to look and what to look at, hopefully.
Yeah, that's kind of beyond me. I'm glad you're doing that kind of research. I've been reading an old Flying Saucer Review, one of their specials, where they talk about landings. And I was reading an article by Jacques Vallée, and I think, he had written his first 2 books, Challenge to Science and Anatomy of a Phenomenon, but he hadn't written Passport to Magonia yet, because Passport to Magonia has all those landings at the end. Well, that's what I'm reading. He's going through all these landings, about 200 of them, just very briefly mentioned in this article. And it's fascinating because so many of them, the witness encounters paralysis, or has some kind of a physical reaction where they feel some kind of vibration or whatever. So I'm reading all these one after another, and there's all this repetition of certain kinds of things. And, sometimes the paralysis occurs without, anything. Oftentimes they aim something at them and there's actually a beam or whatever. But there's so many different descriptions of these beings and their behavior and their craft or whatever. I just, I know I mentioned John Keel about every 5 minutes, and there is a a friend of mine, Jeff, he claims they have a drinking game. They'll listen to one of my podcasts and they'll take a drink every time I mention John Keel, which means they've passed out in about 5 or 6 minutes. But but yeah, it's just fascinating that you get these patterns, but then other things don't jive. You're not getting. You do get the silver coveralls and picking up flowers. And there's one guy, speaking of rabbits, one encounter where the guy is paralyzed and these guys run off with his rabbits.
Yeah, he steals the rabbits out of the hutch. I remember that. I was like, damn, what's up with y'all? Don't be doing that.
Yeah, you guys don't know how to properly take care of these bunny rabbits. What are you doing?
Maybe they're going to eat them. I don't know. Yeah, and then there's the weird stories where, they steal stockings off of women, like a woman is carrying her stockings in one hand because she walked across a creek. So she took her shoes and stockings off, and then she put her shoes on because you don't want to put stockings on wet legs because then they stick and it doesn't work. So she's walking and she's minding her own business picking flowers in the mountains of Italy, and these two weird guys in their little egg-shaped craft with their silver suits run over and steal her stockings.
I love the illustration.
I love that.
The old illustration. They look like they're wearing football helmets from the 1920s.
Yes, that's exactly what they look like. And then there's another case with another woman. She was putting laundry out, and they stole lingerie. I'm like, are y'all just creepers? What's happening? And the only thing I can think of in that period of time is they wanted everybody to think they were from space, but they had no idea how to act like aliens. so they hadn't gotten their behavior down. They hadn't decided how they were going to be. It's like, it's like if they were fairies trying to convince people they were from space, but they didn't really know, how to be. They didn't read enough science fiction or something, or they read the wrong science fiction.
Almost like Men in Black not knowing how to act human.
Yeah, don't they try to drink Jell-O,
And what about the guy, was it John Trasco, where these guys are trying to capture his dog? And he says, we don't mean no harm. We just want your dog.
And he's like, get out. I want my dog. You get your own damn dog. And that's the thing. Again, there's something about dogs. Something. Now, have there been dogmen sighted with UFOs? Like Bigfoot and UFOs?
I think there have been, like Paul Sinclair would tell you, that there'd be a lot of strange lights or whatever in the same vicinity. Are they connected? Are they morphing into these creatures? Nobody has seen that there that's been reported. So the connection is possible, but maybe tenuous. I don't know.
Yeah. Although Lee's case, with his little weird mechanical
in
doohickeys, or whatever they are.
Right. There is some kind of bizarre technology there, but and again, that I'm assuming that the intelligence behind that is the same intelligence that is cloaking these things. So that would be really the only example I could probably think of that where there seems to be some kind of a UFO phenomenon in the same vicinity that these things are.
Yeah.
And it's strange, because he's tried to get people from universities and scientists interested in this area. I mean, you have a virtual laboratory there. And I was talking to him, Linda started writing about Lee's farm, and at least by Monsters Among Us, maybe even before that. And he said that he was perfectly happy to use his name in the book, but for some reason, the legal people wanted to give him a pseudonym. So he's somebody Smith, I think, in Monsters Among Us. And Linda only talks about some of the things that were going on there. But he said that it was, for Linda, it was like a kid in a candy store. Here she's been writing about this, and just a few miles away from where she's living, here's this virtual laboratory over certain acres where this stuff is actually happening that she can go and observe,
Yeah. And that's That's just perfect timing and placement of being in the right place at the right time. One of the other things that I noticed about the Dogman and the Bigfoot thing, they're sort of, in my mind, entwined together. Because like you said, we're okay with Bigfoot. Bigfoot we can kind of deal with, but no. Walking dogs tall, 6 foot, no. We're not having that. I still think that they're related in a way. And I was like, I wonder if they're a different kind of Bigfoot that just has big ears and a tail, or if it's, a variant, just like this is a wilderness being that guards the wilderness. And so it's big and hairy. That's the two things you have to have. And then the rest of it is just, kind of regional window dressing or something. And I was fascinated when I was looking at information about the Native American mounds. And I found that there were some skeletons found in the mounds that had artificial extensions on their teeth. So they had teeth ground down so that the bones of a wolf's muzzle with the sharp teeth could be fitted into the mouth. And then the archaeologists and anthropologists thought maybe they wore a hood of a wolf skin of the face over that so that they were portraying wolf spirits or some other kind of spirits. And this is fascinating to me. So I'm like, oh, so wolf shamans. I wonder if Bigfoot has wolf shamans. I was like, why not? I mean, nobody knows. So,
No.
I'm just throwing things out there.
Well, I guess I do think that there's a distinction, and the one thing is I really haven't heard people report the negative vibe, the evil aspect.
Yeah.
With Bigfoot, and it's very common. The same with Paul Sinclair in England, and he even talked about a connection with them in mounds out there too. Sometimes they're seen near mounds. So I don't know what that's all about. Of course, if you've ever watched Mountain Monsters, there was the episode. There was the episode where the chupacabras in West Virginia were teaming up with Bigfoot. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched an episode of that with Fox, and I was just like shaking my head. I'm like,
well, I met at the Mothman statue. I met a young lady. I won't say how she was related to John Tice, who played Trapper, but we had a good laugh. She said, this person who will remain nameless, they shot everything on the same property, wherever they were supposed to be.
You can tell that.
And I think it was John's property, in fact. And we had a good laugh about some of the things like the Pocahontas fire dragon. And, anyway.
Yeah.
And
the Cherokee something cat. There's a Cherokee death
the Cherokee
cat.
devil.
Yeah.
Right. And remember how Mothman, you don't look at his eyes because you'll pass out.
Yeah.
And of course, who was it? The Buck passed out, but the camera people didn't, which is good. They must have really been.
Their eyes were protected by the camera lenses.
I guess so. I guess that makes sense. But anyway, I digress.
Oh yeah, Mountain Monsters is really, really hilarious to me. Yeah. And
I loved it as a guilty pleasure, especially when I went off with the bizarre conspiracy stuff.
Oh yeah.
And the little girl in the woods and they just they pushed the envelope and then they busted it.
Yeah, they just kept going. They just kept going.
But I don't. And the other thing is, when we talk about this bear wolf or whatever it was, I can't help but think of Zelia Edgar's book, Just Another Tinfoil Hat Presents, where she, of course, she's a Keelian. So she talks about transmogrification, but she has this great phrase, lost in transmogrification. And also she talks about flopped projections and gives examples like perhaps the Enfield horror in Illinois in the 70s, I think. 3 legs, arms protruding out of its chest, and pink glowing eyes. A couple different people saw this, even shot at it. So I'm wondering if some of these things, this so-called werewolf or whatever it was, is just one of those things that got screwed up in translation somehow. You know? Because you don't see many of those. You see plenty of Bigfoots. You see plenty of Dogmen or whatever they are.
Yeah.
But, these... and then you had the Roro, the Rochelle monster.
Yeah.
And I always say Roro sounds like Scooby-Doo trying to form words.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah, there you go. And but it was sort of like slowly coming into manifestation. The bangs in the house, they could smell it. They could feel the breath, but nothing was there. And then finally it showed up, not leaving footprints. And I think eventually it did.
Yeah.
So it was not a conventional Bigfoot. Could not have been simply a cryptid, an undocumented animal.
Yeah.
It was something slowly coming. It's like a textbook case of these things slowly coming into manifestation. And then it would attack a bunch of chickens and not eat them.
Yeah, because probably it doesn't even have insides. I mean, think about it. Do they? Do they have insides? We don't know.
I don't know. I just... but these things have been with us forever, It's part of the human condition. And, I call it the Red Queen effect. When Alice in Wonderland, when the Red Queen told her, if you're going to get anywhere, you got to run faster and faster. And Alice runs as fast as she can, and the trees are staying in the same place. Yeah. So that's what it feels like sometimes when we're trying to sift through this. Yeah. And, have you ever felt like you made a couple connections and you think you're onto something, and then you hit a brick wall, Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think that happens on purpose. Honestly.
I think so too.
That, you think you've got it, you think you've got it, you think you've got it, and then some other evidence or testimony gets thrown in front of you, and it's like a microphone dropping.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like it just went boom, and they were done. And then you sit there and you're just like, why did I waste 3 years on that?
And Jacques Vallée tells us that the phenomena negates itself.
Yes.
In some cases, it's pretty dramatic where somebody will see something and then you get a knock on the door. You can't talk about this. And sometimes the experience is so bizarre that if a person tells it, people don't believe it, and it just shuts it right down.
Of course.
So, and so many of these things do have that incredible high strangeness aspect to it.
I think at this point, I've decided that everybody has some kind of weird thing that has happened to them. And either it was mostly mundane, so they don't think about it as anything weird, or they know it's weird, but they'll never, ever tell anyone.
Right.
And that's part of why I like talking with people who have had experiences. And I'm like, somebody somewhere has seen something weirder than you, but they will never say anything about it. But if they hear your story, maybe they will. Because I think it's a burden on the psyche to keep secrets like that. Because it makes you feel crazy. And it makes you doubt yourself. And it makes you doubt what your truth is. So I think it's really important to keep telling these experiences, keep telling the stories.
Well, I think that's true because a young lady I talked to several years ago, she contacted me on Facebook, and she and her husband, this is Londonderry, New Hampshire. They're near an airport, but they're very familiar with the planes and the lights that go over. And they're standing out early in the morning, it's dark, they're standing on their front porch, and they see these strange lights coming toward them. And then all of a sudden, they're not standing next to each other anymore. It's a little bit lighter out, and they look up and they see this large black triangle brushing the tops of the trees. And then, as so many people do in these things, it didn't register then. They just turned around and went back to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, she realized that I'm missing time. So she was on a quest. It was really bugging her. She wanted to find out what happened. And so I asked her a series of John Keel questions. Things I would have, if I was, locked back in the 1960s, I would have said, I hope you, find what happened during that missing time. I would have known nothing else to ask. And to make the long story short, I found out that they were experiencing typical haunting phenomena, some kind of a little bit of electrical phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Both sons were seeing orbs, some in the house and some outside the house.
Mm-hmm.
She had seen a shadow person.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally I said, this is going to sound like a weird question, but have you ever seen any kind of an animal you couldn't identify, like a Bigfoot or whatever? And she said no. And then she said, oh, wait a minute. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law both saw something near the property, and this thing was seen twice. And what they had seen was something like a black panther standing on two legs. So, and she also had a UFO, a local UFO group over into her house asking questions and so forth. At the same time, they lived in a cul-de-sac, and a black car with its windows blacked out drove down, went around the cul-de-sac, and then drove away. So anyway, if I hadn't asked all these questions, those would have been buried. That would have been not on her. Now later on, she made a breakthrough, and she's very rational about it. She said, "I don't remember these things consciously, so I take it with a grain of salt."
That's good
and
for her, though.
It was kind of she had these two pale grays on one side looking at her and blinking and everything, really creepy. There was something toward her feet that she couldn't even describe. It was so awful. She said the only thing she could think of was, remember Toy Story with that weird kid that cobbled together all those evil-looking, yeah. She said that's what it made her think of.
Ew.
But then off to her right, that she couldn't quite see it, but it was some kind of a female presence. Got the sense of something tall, and like almost like the tall fairy or the tall gray or whatever. And she's saying things like, you've been through this before. Don't worry, it's going to be all right. And she's got all this crap going on. And anyway, so that's what came about. But again, she was one of these people that have had, she and her family have had experiences for years.
Yeah. That is fairly typical, near as I can tell, which is why
Right.
I think everybody has something a little weird that's happened, whether they remember it or not.
Right.
I'm fully convinced at this point that the world is way weirder than
Yes.
any of us thought. I think it's way stranger.
And the paradox is that that seems to be the natural state of things. That people having these experiences are not weird. They're kind of a natural part of reality, even though it might be kind of a sub-reality or whatever. Yet, the human part of us is desperate to make sense of it, but it's always elusive. It's always just out of our grasp.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. Well, do you have
So
any... What?
So why do we torture ourselves like this?
Why do we torture ourselves? I don't know. I think it's the eternal quest to understand, to experience, to know, to understand, to... I just think we're too left-brained. The logic is just really strong and we really want to understand.
Right.
Whereas the right brain is going, just let go. Be like Luke Skywalker, let go. Go with your feelings, Don't think too hard. I'm terrible at not thinking too hard. Well, it's good to see you again.
Well, you too.
And thank you, as always, for coming to
It's my
visit with
pleasure.
me. And if you ever have anything that you want to ask me, let me know. If you ever need a guest,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Sure.
you can always call on me. I can always
All right.
talk about just about anything.
Well, that sounds good. I think we should do that relatively soon.
Okay, thanks. And have a good holiday.
Okay. You too.
Well, that's all for this week's episode of the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts about the podcast or would like to come and talk about your experiences of the paranormal, you can contact us at 6djk67@gmail.com. We promise to even answer you, and we are always happy to hear from you. Thank you.